everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Crazy Tech Reviews. Now, from time to time, I often go thrift shopping. Most of the time, it's for the hope that I could possibly come out with something interesting or collectible, or even just some cool old piece of vintage computer technology that I never even knew existed. And while most of the time I'm unlucky in really finding much at these places, it is still fun to go and see what kind of mysteries await at these thrift stores. And a lot of times too, I've actually tried to film inside of them, and I don't get kicked out or anything. However, I often just forget to either record certain things, or I just lose the footage before I have time to edit them with all the other more prioritized videos I have to make for the channel. However, recently, during the whole COVID pandemic thing, I've had a lot more time on my hands to do things like this, and also a lot more time to edit videos. So, in today's episode, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be stopping by some thrift stores and seeing what kind of cool vintage computer stuff we can find. So the first thrifting trip we took here dates all the way back to May 25th of 2020, and as you can see, it's been a while since I've gone through this. Of course, we had typical Midwest weather here during this time, the good old rain and thunderstorms, but fortunately we made it to the thrift store safely here. Moving to the electronics section, there wasn't really too much interesting stuff immediately, mainly just the typical exercise equipment and old electronics junk that, you typically see in thrift stores. There were a lot of these old Dell keyboards here that seemed to crop up everywhere at these places, as well as a few old network phones. Actually, there were quite a bit. I'm guessing some company must have dumped them off or something. But anyway, yeah, there were a lot of those. However, those aren't really interesting or useful to me. There was this really cool turntable, but I don't really have anything to use it with, and it seemed to be broken, so I just passed on it. Other than that, though, it was just a bunch of the typical iPhone docks and, network phones and tripods and stuff that you typically see showing up at places like these thrift stores. However, I was looking at some old VCRs and stuff when I looked down and saw this. Now, what this is it appears to be some kind of old camera or something like that. Initially, I thought it was some kind of TV camera due to its size. As you can see, it's a pretty beefy old camera. However, doing some further research proved that it was anything but that. I looked up the model in Google a few months later, and it turns out it's actually a home video camcorder that uses VHS tapes, full-size VHS tapes, which is pretty interesting. You don't typically see stuff like this very much anymore. Anyway, unfortunately, I decided not to pick up that camera, which I kind of regret because it's a really neat camera. But anyway, moving over to these shelves here, as you can see, there's a bunch of random junk. I don't know why anybody would ever send their old phone cases to a thrift store. It's just weird to me. I did also find this Canon PowerShot thing here. However, I already have a model that's very similar to this one, so I just decided not to pick it up. Plus, it's not a really good camera anyway. Bunch of old adding machines as usual, as well as this weird little thing. I'm not sure exactly what it is. It looks like some kind of calculator device. However, I didn't really mess around with it too much to actually figure out what it did. So if any of you knew, please let me know. There were also a bunch of old records and stuff here. However, most of these are probably junk, and I don't really care to buy any of them. So yeah, anyway. There was this really delightful 8-track tape player here, as well as some old video games up towards the front of the store, which most of them are sports games, but whatever. Anyway, though, with that said, the rest of the stuff was just some miscellaneous junk, so I'd say it's time to move on to the next store. Anyway, with that said, it's time to move on to our second store of the day, and that is Goodwill. Again, moving straight to the electronics section, nothing really stands out here, mainly just crappy speakers, Dell Ultra Sharp monitors, which I actually wish I would have picked up, old keyboards, and telephones and stuff like that. However, there was one of those old Wii exercise pad things, which is kind of interesting, but I didn't buy it. There's also a lot of AV equipment here like usual, some that was a little bit more interesting than others. But one of the more interesting things I found here was this. It's an old Sony tape that was still sealed up. There was also what appeared to be a hydro-dipped PS3 controller, so interesting. This here too I ended up picking up. I'm sorry for the shaky cam, but basically this appears to be a vintage or older TV that's composite. And I ended up picking this up to use with some of my older computers that have composite output. I also found another tripod here, which usually I would have just ignored, but I happened to be in need of another tripod for B-roll shots and stuff like that, so I decided to pick this one up since it was in good condition. I also saw this, which happened to catch my eye. This appears to be one of those old PC car steering wheel controllers. And unfortunately, it turned out it was for Xbox, and I do happen to have an original Xbox. It's just that I can't really use it because I don't have the proper cables and everything. So I decided to opt out of this one for now. So now that we're back in the studio, this is all I ended up buying: just the tripod, screen, and the cassette tape. I went ahead and took the screen out of the case because I wanted to test and make sure that it works. So I'll go ahead and bring out the NES for that, since it is a composite video device. And sure enough, it does work, and it does work very well. However, the colors are not the best, obviously, due to the fact that it probably uses a cheap LCD screen from the early 2000s. I'll also go ahead and clean off the label. However, it was really stubborn and did not want to come off, so I ended up just leaving the rest of it on there, which was annoying, but hey, what can I do? Anyway, with that said, it's time to move on to the more interesting of the two stops, thrifting trips we made in 2020. So, moving forward to August of 2020, we went on a trip to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Now, this is a neat little touristy sort of town, and there's a lot of tourist-themed stores in here, and basically, as you can see, this one here is selling some interesting merchandise. But anyway, moving on, we were just sort of walking down the street here when we came across what I would say to be somewhat of a collector's sort of shop. It was something like that. But in the back, they actually had a bunch of old retro goodies, like this old TV here, as well as some old Super Nintendos that were boxed, as well as a boxed NES and many other boxed items. So yeah, it's definitely not every day that you come across stuff like this. There were also several game cartridges for both the Nintendo Entertainment Systems and several other different platforms. These here are the Nintendo Entertainment System ones. As you can see, there's a lot of good games in here, and this one apparently had something shaking around inside of it, but I ended up picking up this one here, which is Galaga for the NES. I thought it was kind of interesting, plus I like the game Galaga, so I decided to pick it up. And anyway, moving over here, you can see some of their Atari 2600 selection, which was also pretty large. There's a lot of interesting stuff here as well. Looking back on it, I wish I would have picked more stuff up, but I don't really have an Atari 2600 anyway, so I really only ended up getting a few things from here. They also had a lot of Sega Genesis games and Super Nintendo games, and apparently even some other things. They also had this really cool boxed Bandai Pac-Man arcade thing with the vacuum fluorescent screens. Anyway, as far as the Atari games I ended up getting, the only other things I ended up getting from this place were Super Breakout, and then I got Pac-Man. However, I didn't show it here for some reason. They also had this really neat jewel case. However, a lot of the things in here were pretty expensive. There was a boxed copy of Super Mario Bros. 2 I wanted, but I ended up not getting it. We also stopped at another store that was somewhat similar as far as it being sort of like a video gaming and collecting store, and they actually had a pretty good selection of games. There was also a lot of newer stuff like Xbox One era stuff and PlayStation stuff, but one of the interesting things they had at this store that wasn't at the other one was Sega Cd Games. Now, Sega CD was sort of an obscure little expansion that you could get for like your Sega Genesis machines, and they weren't really too popular. However, it's still interesting to see. They also had a good selection of classic NES and Super Nintendo Entertainment System games as well. However, I didn't really buy any of these, as most of them I already had or weren't interested in, and I don't even own a SNES anyway, so there's no reason I'm really getting any games for those, really. Anyway, though, with that said, this is basically most of what I got during the second thrift store trip. Starting here, we have the Galaga Cartridge that I found for the NES, which I picked up because I thought it was kind of interesting. We also have Pac-Man, which isn't really a good game, to be honest, but I picked it up because I needed it for a video I'm working on in the future. And finally, I picked up this Super Breakout game here, which is pretty interesting. I hope to get a 2600 one of these days so I can mess around with some of these a bit. But yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed I'm not able to really mess around with this one due to the fact that the NES broke, but I at least know it works because I was able to try it. So yeah, that basically wraps up for today's video. I'm kind of a little bit disappointed I wasn't able to really show this off too much because the NES needs some repairs done to it. It's the classic instance of the cartridge connector going out, but I'll get that eventually, and yeah, anyway, with that said, I think we did find a lot of interesting stuff, especially in the second part, and definitely a lot of stuff that will come in handy for the channel and for other things. But anyway, that said, I hope to do some videos like this semi-annually or annually, or however it all works out. But
I figured it'd be sort of interesting to go around thrift stores in the area and sort of see what cool stuff we can find. But anyway, with that said, that wraps it up for today's video. And yeah, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe. It definitely helps me out a lot. Be sure to check out the Discord server and everything else. And with that said, see you guys all next time.